The Omega fainted before the throne, and when the Alpha King caught the body, Bruises told the truth. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to Alara Wynn. The great hall of Thornfall glowed beneath chandeliers shaped like frozen moons, their pale light drifting across marble floors polished smooth by generations. Alara stood at the very edge of the gathering, where the shadows felt safer than the judgment in the room. She kept her hands folded to hide the faint trembling in her fingers, a quiet effort to appear composed even as dozens of eyes slid past her as if she barely existed. The scent of pine resin from the torches mixed with the crisp winter air seeping through the tall windows, brushing her cheeks with a reminder that she was still here, still visible, if only barely. Court whispers rose like soft static, tightening the space around her. Most spoke of Lady Riona Hale, radiant in silver silk near the dais, the favored choice for Luna. No one spoke of Alara except in lowered tones, a gentle pity disguised as politeness, as though her fragility were an inconvenience they wished she would tuck away. She lifted her gaze for a moment, long enough to glimpse the obsidian throne where Alpha King Rowan Thorn sat, with a posture carved from focus and restraint. His presence filled the hall even when he did not move, a quiet command woven into the air itself. Alara quickly looked down again, her breath catching before she steadied it. She had no place near someone like him. Everyone made sure she remembered that. Yet tonight, something in her chest felt unfamiliar, a soft tightening, a sense that the night was stretching toward a point she could not yet see. A court attendant brushed past her too quickly, sending a ripple through her balance. She caught herself with a small inhale, smoothing her skirt as though the gesture could erase the brief stumble. "Careful, Alara," someone murmured with a hint of impatience. "You draw eyes when you falter." She nodded without meeting their gaze. It was easier that way. Heat rose unexpectedly beneath her skin, and she blinked to clear her vision. The hall seemed brighter than moments before, the sound sharper, each footstep echoing longer than it should have. She pressed a palm lightly to her temple, grounding herself with a slow inhale. She told herself she could endure this, just a little longer. But her breath thinned, a fragile thread slipping from her grasp. The room tilted gently, the chandeliers blurring into pale ribbons of light. She tried to take a step, but the floor felt distant, her strength folding like paper in rain. Her heart whispered a quiet plea she couldn't voice. Then everything slipped. The last thing she sensed was the cold air rising to meet her before the world fell softly away. For a suspended moment after Alara fell, sound did not return. The great hall held its breath, as if every torch and stone understood something fragile had just broken in plain sight. When awareness stirred at the edge of her senses, she felt warmth first, steady and grounding, as though someone had cupped light itself to keep it from slipping away. She did not know yet that she was no longer falling. The murmur of the court rose slowly, a soft wave of uncertainty, but Alara herself floated between waking and distance, held by a presence she could not name. Her lashes fluttered once before settling again, and she drifted into a softer darkness, unaware of how the moment had shifted the entire room. Court attendants rushed forward with hesitation, unsure whether they were permitted to approach. Their uncertainty rippled outward, reaching Lady Riona near the dais. Riona's expression tightened for just a breath, surprise flickering before she smoothed it away. No one had expected Alara's collapse. No one had expected the hall to react as though something sacred had been disturbed. A pair of young healers, barely older than Alara, stood frozen at the base of the steps, glancing at one another as if waiting for instruction that never came. "She must have forgotten to eat," someone whispered too loudly. Alara would have shrunk from those words if she had heard them, for she had grown used to quiet assumptions made about her steadiness or lack thereof. It was easier for the court to believe she was simply delicate than to imagine she had endured more than she ever admitted. Light from the chandeliers shifted with a faint draft, brushing across her face where it rested against a firm surface she could not yet identify. Her breathing steadied almost instinctively at the warmth surrounding her, her fingers curling faintly toward the fabric beneath them. The court's whispers softened into a different tone now, not mockery, but confusion, as though they were collectively trying to decide how they ought to react. Alara would not learn until much later that many in the hall had never seen the Alpha King move from his throne for anyone. The marble floor caught an echo that finally pierced the haze, the measured steps of the royal physician weaving through the crowd. He approached cautiously, adjusting the satchel at his side, his expression shifting into focus as he neared the scene. "It appears to be a fainting spell," he murmured with professional calm, though his eyes widened slightly as he assessed the situation more fully. It was clear he had not expected to find Alara where she lay, supported carefully instead of crumpled on the cold floor. He reached out with a steady hand, placing 2 fingers gently at the side of her neck, and nodded as her pulse beat evenly beneath his touch. Her skin, usually cool from nervousness, warmed slowly under the ambient glow of the hall. The physician leaned in closer, studying her features with thoughtful concern. "She needs rest," he said quietly. "She must not stand again too soon." His voice, though calm, carried enough authority that even the whispering nobles fell silent. Alara, drifting somewhere between consciousness and the safe lull of exhaustion, drew a slow breath. She did not yet understand that the hall was no longer looking at her with indifference. Something had shifted, something subtle but unmistakable, and as she lay suspended in that quiet, she would have no way of knowing that the moment she opened her eyes again, nothing in Thornfall would feel the same. The royal physician's quiet pronouncement had steadied the hall, but the stillness that followed carried a different weight, one that Alara did not yet sense as she drifted between the edges of waking. Warmth surrounded her, steady and patient, a contrast to the cold marble she should have met when she fell. Her breaths came softer now, her pulse finding its rhythm as the glow from the chandeliers brushed across her cheeks. A faint sigh escaped her as her head shifted slightly, her hair brushing against fabric rather than stone. Court members exchanged uncertain glances, their whispers tapering into silence when the heavy doors at the far end of the hall closed with a muted reverberation. It was as though the citadel itself acknowledged a boundary being drawn. The royal physician adjusted the strap of his satchel and straightened with a thoughtful frown. He looked at the space where she rested, his eyes narrowing with quiet comprehension as he observed how carefully she was supported. He cleared his throat, directing his words to no one in particular. She must remain still. Sudden movement could startle her system further. His tone was gentle but firm, carrying an authority that lingered in the air long after his sentence ended. Alara stirred faintly at the edge of consciousness. Her fingers curled lightly toward the warmth beneath them, her palm flattening for a moment as her senses reached outward. A soft sound, barely more than breath, left her as she tried to orient herself. The scent of pine smoke from the torches mingled with something steadier, a cool scent that reminded her of winter mornings before sunrise. It was familiar in a way she could not place, a grounding contrast to the drifting fog in her mind. Her brow furrowed slightly at the edges as she struggled to lift her awareness. Her voice did not come, but a quiet tension gathered in her features as though she sensed she was being observed. A court attendant stepped closer, hesitating as she clasped her hands tightly in front of her chest. "Should we get a cot?" she whispered to the physician, darting a glance toward the dais. "Or perhaps move her to the infirmary?" The physician gave a slow, deliberate shake of his head. "Not yet. Sudden relocation could cause distress when she wakes." The words floated outward, settling uneasily among the nobles. They were unaccustomed to being told to wait for an Omega's comfort. Lady Riona, still positioned near the front, smoothed the fabric of her silver gown with measured precision. Her expression remained composed, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of tension she could not quite mask. She had not expected this level of attention to shift toward Alara, even indirectly. Meanwhile, Alara exhaled softly, her lashes trembling as she drifted closer to waking. Her breathing steadied again, instinctively matching the calm presence that supported her. The light overhead glimmered against her skin, revealing the faint trace of exhaustion lingering across her features. She shifted the slightest bit, unaware of the quiet ripple that moved through the hall at her motion. Her voice emerged only as a faint whisper shaped entirely by instinct. I did not mean to. The unfinished thought dissolved into the air. She did not yet know what moment awaited her when her eyes finally opened, nor how many truths had already begun to surface in her absence. For now, the hall watched with an uneasy patience, waiting for the young Omega to return to the world, unaware that her awakening would pull the entire evening onto a different path. Alara's breathing steadied into a soft rhythm, her awareness drifting closer to the surface as the hall held its uneasy silence. Warmth cradled her, steady and constant, and though her eyes had not yet opened, she felt the faint impression of movement nearby, the kind of movement that carried authority without sound. A shift in the light brushed across her cheek, and the subtle scent of winter pine deepened around her, grounding her without explanation. The physician lingered only a few feet away, his posture attentive as he monitored the slightest change in her expression. He adjusted his glasses and murmured to the nearest attendant, "She is beginning to wake. Keep the space clear around her." His words spread in gentle ripples as nobles stepped back, forming an involuntary circle that felt more like a boundary than a courtesy. Lady Riona clasped her hands together more tightly now, the shimmer of her silver gown catching the glow of the chandeliers. She kept her gaze trained forward, but the tension in her eyes betrayed her anticipation. Alara shifted faintly, her brow creasing as sensation returned. Her fingers curled lightly, brushing against the surface beneath her, and she took a deeper breath that lifted her chest with quiet effort. Her lashes fluttered once, then again, catching the soft light. When her eyes finally opened, the world came to her in fragments. First the brightness overhead, soft but unfamiliar. Then the hush of voices around her, low and reverent. Finally, the realization that she was not on the cold marble floor where she had expected to land. Confusion flickered across her features. Her voice emerged in barely more than a whisper. "What happened?" The physician stepped forward with careful calm. "You fainted, Miss Wen. Do not rush yourself." Alara blinked, trying to steady her focus. She attempted to sit up instinctively, but a gentle shift beneath her reminded her that she was already supported. The warmth held steady as though encouraging her to move slowly. Embarrassment washed over her first, a familiar heat blooming beneath her skin. "I am so sorry," she murmured, the words instinctive. "I did not mean to cause disruption." A few nobles exchanged glances, startled by the earnest apology. They were accustomed to confidence or pretense, not soft sincerity. As Alara adjusted slightly, the edge of her sleeve slipped back from her wrist. A faint mark, barely noticeable under the chandelier light, brushed into view. She quickly pulled the fabric forward again, hoping no one had seen. She focused on her breath, trying to calm the faint tremor in her chest. The room felt too large, too bright, and yet the warmth around her steadied her in a way she could not understand. Her eyes lifted for a moment, searching the faces surrounding her. She noticed the widened eyes, the sudden hush that deepened the air, and the strange shift in attention that felt heavier than curiosity. Something unspoken touched the edge of her awareness, something she could not yet name. She drew another slow breath, her voice small but steady. "I can stand if someone helps me." The physician shook his head. "Not yet. You must let your strength return first." Alara nodded gently, accepting his guidance with quiet instinct. She did not yet realize that the hall had changed the moment she opened her eyes, nor that every breath she took now carried a truth inching closer to the surface, waiting for the moment it could no longer remain hidden. The hall's uneasy quiet deepened as Alara steadied her breath, still supported by the warmth beneath her. She blinked slowly, her vision adjusting to the soft glow of the chandeliers that shimmered like suspended frost above her. Every sound reached her with a strange clarity, from the faint rustle of silk gowns to the restrained inhale of a noble somewhere near the dais. She sensed eyes on her, more of them than she was accustomed to. Usually glances slid past her as though she were part of the decor, something silent and unobtrusive. But now the air felt charged, watchful. The physician knelt beside her once more, checking her pulse with gentle precision. "Your heartbeat is steadying," he murmured. "Take your time." Alara nodded lightly, though a quiet embarrassment prickled at her. She had not meant to draw attention. She never did. Her fingers curled instinctively toward her sleeve as it slipped again, and she pulled the fabric forward quickly. Yet even that small motion seemed to draw a ripple through the observing crowd, as though they had noticed more than she realized. She swallowed, her voice soft but determined. I truly can stand. I feel much better now. The physician looked as though he wished to protest, but something in her expression made him pause. Perhaps slowly, he conceded, shifting so she might rise at her own pace. As she prepared to move, she felt the presence behind her adjust in a way that encouraged her, a silent signal that she did not have to rush. She pushed herself upward with careful breath, expecting the cold marble to meet her. Instead, she found herself being guided smoothly until her feet touched the polished floor. The transition was gentle, as though someone had measured the moment to ensure she did not strain herself. A soft hush spread through the hall again. Alara steadied herself on her toes, her hand instinctively lifting to her temple as a brief wave of dizziness brushed past before fading. I am sorry, she whispered again, addressing no one in particular. I did not mean to interrupt the gathering. Her apology felt like a pebble falling into a lake. The silence it met told her nothing about how she was being perceived. She noticed then that a few nobles had taken discreet steps backward, their expressions shifting into something between uncertainty and realization. Lady Riona's gaze flicked toward Alara's arm with a subtle tension, as though she had caught a glimpse of something she did not wish to acknowledge. Alara lowered her gaze quickly, unaware of the impression she created simply by standing again. She tried to gather herself with practiced composure, smoothing the skirt of her dress and adjusting her breath. The room still felt too bright, but the steady presence beside her grounded her, keeping her calm. Even as she faced the hall's attention, if the court will allow, the physician said gently, I will escort Miss Wynne to a nearby chamber so she may rest. Alara nodded, grateful for the offer, though she sensed a shift in the air that made her hesitate. She felt as though the hall was waiting for something, a beat suspended in time. She did not understand why. Her hand lifted instinctively to adjust her sleeve once more. The fabric shifted just enough to reveal the faintest shadow of a mark beneath. And though she covered it quickly, she felt the air shift again, sharper this time, as though a truth hovering at the edge of the moment was drawing closer, waiting to be seen. Alara stood very still, her breath gathered in a soft, measured rhythm as the hall's attention tightened around her like a circle drawn in fine sand. She felt the weight of it without fully understanding why, a quiet prickle along her skin that told her something unseen had shifted. The physician remained at her side, one hand hovering near her shoulder in case she swayed again, but she steadied herself with a small inhale. The air held a cool edge from the winter winds pressing faintly against the tall windows, and that crispness helped her focus when the brightness of the chandeliers threatened to overwhelm her senses. She tried to offer the physician a reassuring nod, though her fingers instinctively reached for her sleeve again, hoping to conceal the faint shadow of a mark she feared someone might have glimpsed. But even that simple movement seemed to ripple outward. A few nobles exchanged looks that were not unkind, only uncertain, as though they were trying to understand something that had not been spoken aloud. Alara lowered her gaze, unaware of how carefully the hall watched the tension in her posture, the way she curled inward as though protecting something fragile. Miss Wynne, the physician said softly, if you feel strong enough, we can move at your pace. Alara nodded, though her pulse fluttered in her throat. She took a tentative step, and the presence behind her adjusted again, ensuring she did not falter. That subtle steadiness was something she felt more than saw, a quiet reassurance that cushioned each movement. Still, her attention flickered with worry. She did not want to appear fragile, not tonight, not in front of so many who already assumed she was. She moved slowly, her steps light on the polished marble, but every inch of progress drew more eyes. Some nobles leaned slightly forward, as if searching for confirmation of a suspicion they had not yet dared to voice. Lady Riona's gaze followed Alara with an intensity that did not match her otherwise composed expression. A faint crease formed at the corner of her mouth, not quite disapproval, not quite concern, but something caught between the two. The hall's atmosphere grew denser, as if bracing for a revelation none of them had asked for. When Alara lifted her head again, her hair fell over her shoulder in a soft cascade, brushing against the fabric of her gown. Her sleeve shifted with the movement, sliding back just an inch. It was enough for the light to catch the faint outline of a muted discoloration along her forearm. She covered it quickly, her breath tightening with quiet embarrassment as she prayed no one had noticed. But the physician paused, his eyes narrowing not with judgment, but with understanding. He did not speak. Not yet. The nobles closest to Alara stilled, their attention sharpening like thin frost spreading across a pond at dawn. Alara sensed the quiet change, though she could not place its cause. Her voice, gentle and earnest, broke the silence. "Thank you for helping me. I truly did not mean to cause trouble tonight." Her sincerity floated across the hall like a warm note threaded through cold air. No one responded immediately. Instead, the stillness deepened as though the room itself was listening, waiting for a truth that hovered just beyond reach. Alara exhaled softly, unaware that the marks she tried so hard to hide had already begun to reshape the night around her, pulling her toward a moment that would let no shadow remain unseen. The hall did not breathe. That was the first thing Alara sensed, even before she understood why the silence had deepened into something almost fragile. She stood with her hands gently clasped, unaware that every noble eye had fixed on the faint mark she had tried so hard to hide. The chandeliers above shimmered with steady light, but the warmth she had felt supporting her a moment ago shifted, rising with a presence so composed and unmistakably commanding that the air itself seemed to adjust. Around it, she lifted her gaze without meaning to, her attention drawn by an instinct older than thought. Alpha King Rowan Thorn had risen from his throne. The quiet motion traveled through the hall like a ripple, subtle yet absolute in its impact. Even the torches along the walls seemed to settle their flames, as though acknowledging the significance of his movement. Alara's breath caught softly, not out of fear, but from the sheer unexpectedness of seeing him step forward. He moved with a calm certainty, his posture defined by a quiet strength that required no display. His coat shifted with the controlled rhythm of his stride, each step measured and unhurried. The nobles parted without a word, forming a path not because he demanded it, but because the air around him allowed for nothing else. Alara felt her heart lift to her throat. She bowed her head in instinctive respect, though she could not stop the tremor in her hands. "Your Majesty," she whispered, unsure whether he could even hear her in the vastness of the hall. Rowan paused beside her, his presence close enough that the room seemed smaller around them. Alara kept her eyes lowered, but she sensed the way his attention settled on her with a focus that felt almost like a shelter. When he spoke, his voice was steady, carrying the grounded warmth of winter embers. "Miss Wynne," he said, "you stood when you could barely remain conscious. You owe no apology for that." The simple assurance reached her more deeply than she expected, softening something inside her that had been tense for far too long. She attempted a small nod, swallowing the emotion that rose unexpectedly in her chest. "I just did not want to trouble anyone," she murmured, her voice barely carrying. Rowan studied her gently, the kind of attention that sought truth rather than explanation. The physician stepped back a respectful distance, allowing space as the king's gaze dropped briefly to Alara's sleeve. She tried once more to pull the fabric forward, but her hand hesitated midway, aware that the attempt itself would draw more attention. Rowan's expression did not harden, nor did it show alarm. Instead, a quiet understanding settled over his features, the kind that carried weight without judgment. "Alara," he said softly, using her first name with careful respect, "you do not need to hide anything in my hall." The words fell into the silence like a gentle chord, resonant and steady. Whispers stirred at the edges of the nobles, their confusion mixing with a dawning realization that this night was changing shape. Alara blinked, her breath fluttering. She had never heard her name spoken with such certainty, as though it belonged to someone worthy of being addressed directly by a king. She lowered her gaze again, unable to hold the emotion swelling in her chest. "Your Majesty," she whispered, "I truly am all right." Rowan did not move, yet the steadiness of his presence felt like a shield shaping itself around her. "Even so," he replied, his tone firm but gentle, "you should never have to pretend to be." His words, simple and honest, settled into the hall with undeniable clarity, marking the moment when the night's quiet truths finally began to surface. The hall's stillness gathered itself into a quiet that felt almost luminous, as if the very air recognized the significance of the king's words and held them gently in place. Alara stood with her head slightly bowed, her hands folded near her waist, doing everything she could to steady the flutter in her chest. She did not understand why the room watched her so intently, nor why her name spoken by the Alpha King carried a warmth she had never known herself worthy of. Rowan's presence beside her remained calm and sure, neither demanding nor overwhelming. He simply existed there with a steadiness that softened the edges of the moment. His attention, focused fully on her, pulled the hall into a single point of quiet clarity. Alara inhaled softly, gathering the courage to speak. "I promise I am fine, Your Majesty," she said, her voice light but earnest. "I only need a moment to breathe." Rowan studied her expression, not with scrutiny, but with a sensitivity that suggested he saw more than she revealed. The physician stepped closer with a respectful incline of his head. "Your Majesty, if Miss Wynne is willing, I should escort her to a private chamber to rest. The fainting spell may have been caused by exhaustion or an empty stomach." Alara felt heat bloom across her cheeks. She hated the idea of seeming fragile before the entire court. "I truly did not mean for this to become an issue," she whispered. "I will manage. I always do." There was a softness in Rowan's eyes, subtle yet unmistakable, as though he recognized something in her voice that others had missed. "Alara," he said gently, "no one should have to manage alone." Before she could respond, a small shift of movement in the crowd drew attention. Lady Riona stepped forward, her expression composed though a faint strain lingered behind her poised smile. "Your Majesty," she addressed Rowan, "I am sure Miss Wynne appreciates your concern, but perhaps it would be best for her to recover away from the center of the gathering. The court is unsettled." Rowan did not look away from Alara, though his tone remained even. "The court is unsettled because something is wrong, Lady Riona. It is not Miss Wynne's presence that troubles them." The nobles stirred, unsure whether they should look directly at Alara or respectfully avert their gaze. Alara lowered her eyes, wishing she could quiet the attention with a single breath. She reached again for her sleeve, a reflex born from instinct more than thought. The fabric shifted, revealing not the full mark, but enough to draw a quiet gasp from someone nearby. Alara froze. She immediately covered the exposed skin, her heart tightening in her chest. She forced a calm breath, but the air seemed thinner now. Rowan's gaze lowered with gentle precision, not demanding, simply observing the tension in her movement. "Alara," he said quietly, "will you allow me to help you?" She shook her head almost imperceptibly. "It is not necessary, Your Majesty. These marks are nothing. They happen when I work too quickly or bruise easily when I carry things. It is nothing worth troubling the court." But her words, soft as they were, did not land as she intended. Instead, they deepened the stillness, as though the hall understood something she did not. Rowan exhaled slowly, the sound measured and calm. "Bruises do not form without reason," he replied, his voice low. "And no one in my hall should feel afraid to speak their truth." Alara's pulse fluttered again. She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting uncertainty, gratitude, and something fragile she did not dare name. In that moment, she knew the night was no longer following the path it was meant to. Something hidden had begun to surface, pulling the truth into the light with a gentleness she had never experienced before. For a heartbeat, Alara could not move. The hall surrounded her in a hush so complete it felt as though the very stones were listening, waiting for the next breath that might shift the course of the night. She stood with her fingers curled near her sleeve, her posture small yet steady, holding herself as though the slightest motion might draw more attention than she could bear. Rowan remained beside her, his presence calm and unwavering, a quiet strength that softened the weight of so many eyes upon her. His voice, when it reached her again, carried a warmth that settled gently around the moment. "You are not in trouble, Alara," he said, "and you are not alone." The words touched her with unexpected tenderness. She lifted her gaze just enough to meet his for a fleeting second, and in that brief connection she felt something shift inside her, something that felt like the faintest spark of safety. The physician stepped forward cautiously, sensing the delicacy of the moment. "Your Majesty," he addressed Rowan, "Miss Wynne may need evaluation in a private chamber." Stress can manifest in ways that look like weakness when it is simply fatigue. His tone made it clear he had noticed more than he said aloud. Rowan nodded slightly, but kept his attention on Alara. Do you feel steady enough to walk? She hesitated, not wanting to inconvenience anyone further. Yes, she whispered. I believe so. Rowan extended a hand, not insisting, simply offering. The hall watched as though the gesture itself carried meaning they had never expected to see. Alara stared at his hand for a moment, her breath catching, before she placed her fingers lightly in his. His grip was gentle, mindful of her hesitation, yet firm enough to reassure her that she would not falter. As they walked a few steps away from the center of the hall, nobles instinctively made space, their silence no longer filled with speculation, but with something closer to recognition. Alara moved carefully, her breath evening out as the distance grew between her and the place where she had fainted. The shadows near the side of the hall offered a softer glow, easing the intensity of the moment. When they paused, Rowan released her hand slowly, ensuring she had her balance before stepping back a respectful distance. Alara, he said, his voice lower now, meant only for her and those standing closest. If something or someone has caused you distress, you may speak freely. No consequence will fall on you for telling the truth. Her eyes softened, but she shook her head gently. Your Majesty, there is nothing to say. I sometimes bruise easily. It is only that. Rowan watched her with quiet thoughtfulness. He did not press her, but his gaze held an understanding that reached deeper than her explanation aloud. Very well, he said, his tone calm. But know this. Should you ever wish to speak, I will listen, and no one in my kingdom will ever fault you for being honest. A subtle warmth filled her chest, startling in its tenderness. She nodded, unable to find words strong enough to express the gratitude rising within her. A soft murmur traveled through the hall, not of gossip but of realization, as though the court understood that something significant had taken place. Rowan turned back toward the assembly, his posture regaining the quiet authority of a king. But before he stepped away from her side, he spoke one last time, his voice steady and unmistakably clear. From this moment forward, Miss Wynne is under my protection. The hall exhaled as one, and Alara felt the world shift beneath her feet, not with fear, but with the dawning sense that her life had just changed in a way she could not yet comprehend.